would you like?
To a name.
Welcome to the HBCU Green Fund pre-COP27 Africa and Diaspora Summit. Our goal this week is to feature climate impacts already underway in Africa, to highlight grassroots efforts to combat climate change and adapt to those changes, and also to restore natural habitats, and also finally to connect and strengthen relationships of HBCUs with African communities, institutions, and projects on the ground. We're particularly interested in connecting HBCU students, faculty, and building institutional relationships. We are streaming across Africa, all the way from the West Coast, Senegal, Mauritania, Guinea-Bissau, all the way to the East Coast, Kenya, Ghana, and South Africa, etc. So with that in mind, know that our audience is both African folks engaged in climate activism and projects on the ground, as well as HBCU students and the climate justice community here in the US. With that in mind, I would love for each of you to introduce yourselves and your work in light of the climate crisis that we're all engaged in and our effort to connect HBCUs and our students with Africa. And I will begin taking each of you in order. I thought I would start with Dr. Gregg from FAMU. I will then go to Dr. Williams from Clark Atlanta University, and then Dr. Siflo Clark from Howard University. And I had that down before we started. And later, Dr. Poe from Lincoln University will join the Zoom as well. And so with that, I'm going to open, and Dr. Gregg, if you would give a fuller introduction and say something about your work at Florida A&M and how it connects to this initiative.
Well, thank you and good evening. And I'd like to first thank the HBCU Green Fund for the great job they're doing and this great idea to have this discussion about climate on the continent of Africa and in the diaspora. And I'm especially honored to be among my peers and colleagues at other HBCUs who I know are doing great things that they're going to share with you as well. I am a professor of environmental science and policy at Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University in Tallahassee, Florida. We are part of the State University System of Florida, so we're a public institution. We are also what we call a land grant institution, meaning we do a lot of work in agriculture. We do a lot of extension work with farmers, especially Black farmers. And we do a lot of international work as well. And we have a lot of international faculty from all over the world, especially the continent of Africa. We have several. Our dean is Dr. Victor Ibenusi is from Africa. Dr. Michael Abazingi from Ghana is on our faculty. And this is just in the School of the Environment. And we have people all across the campus. So this is a great opportunity to discuss these issues. So my work as a faculty member here at Florida A&M University, I currently am teaching courses in environmental justice, where we look at the disproportionate impact of environmental stressors on people of color and low wealth populations. So we're now talking about the impacts of climate change on populations around the world and including in the United States. I'm also teach a course in, I'm teaching this semester, a class in environmental toxicology and human health, as well as environmental and occupational health. And so we're looking at that intersection, not just about how climate impacts the environment, but how it's going to impact the human health, and especially in terms of heat and food security and water quality and water availability. We're bringing all that into the picture. And just as we have faculty from around the world, we have students from around the world as well. And again, we have quite a few students from the continent. I have a couple of students who are from Ghana, from Nigeria. These are students who are doing their graduate work under my supervision. We have students working on their PhD and their master's degree, looking at various environmental science and policy issues. I also do work in sustainability, and at FAMU, Florida A&M University, we have a Sustainability Institute. And what we're focused on now is we're looking at how to engage more students across campus in sustainability. And we think that's through offering elective courses in, for example, sustainability entrepreneurship. And one of the things that I think is relative to what I do and relative to this climate conference and focus on the continent and the diaspora, we do a lot of work around community engagement and we study about it, but we actually get into the practice of how do we get community people, regular folks, not people from the ivory tower and people who are decision makers. How do we get people who are directly being impacted by the issues to the table and involved in these decision-making processes, and getting decision makers to respect their input and their knowledge about these issues as far as what their appropriate solutions are. So we're doing that too. And of course, as an institution, we are trying to produce students who are environmentally literate in general. So that's across the campus. That's why we teach general education courses in the fundamentals of environmental science. That's why we promote the Sustainability Institute, which is open to students across the campus. And that's why we train students in degrees in environmental science, environmental studies, undergrad, and PhD and master's degree in environmental science. And again, our students at both the undergraduate and graduate level come from across the world, and they're going back out across the world and contributing and being change agents, and especially around this important issue of environment, climate, human health, environmental health. It's all very important. And the last thing I want to highlight is that I'm currently concluding my role as president of the National Technical Association. And we work very closely all the time with the HBCU Green Fund. And what we're trying to do there is, one, broaden participation in STEM, advocate for more funds and resources to produce more young people in STEM and get them more engaged, especially students of color. So I think I'm gonna stop there and we can move on to the next faculty member. And again, I really thank the HBCU Green Fund for the invitation, and more importantly, of the great leadership, their role they're playing in highlighting what's going on in the continent of Africa, in the diaspora, and how we are people engaged in climate issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gregg. And with that, I'm going to move to Dr. Myron Williams, and I will share that Dr. Zizway Poe from Lincoln has joined us, but we will go next to Dr. Williams.
Okay, thank you very much, Felicia. And again, I would also like to thank all the organizers of this event. We're beginning to focus as a community on really the defining problem of our age and the future, thinking about climate change. My name is Myron Williams. I'm an associate professor of chemistry at Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a private HBCU, and we're part of the Atlanta University Center Consortium, the AUC, which includes Spelman College, Morehouse College, and Morehouse College of Medicine. We I have primarily taught graduate and undergraduate biochemistry. That's sort of the nature of my background. First year seminar, and I'm currently teaching general chemistry to students who are biology, chemistry, physics, engineering majors. My own research has, well, we have research, we grant the PhD and master's degree in biology and chemistry, master's degrees in computer science, physics, mathematics, and PhD in mathematics as well. And some of our research focus has tended to be on, as a STEM departments or STEM departments, as well as the university, we do tend to focus on the African diaspora and African issues. Been a part of the Cancer Center, which focuses on prostate cancer, which is a disease that disproportionately affects African-American men. However, about 8 or 9 years ago, I read Hot, Flat, and Crowded by Michael Friedman and became aware that climate change was a serious problem and began to turn my academic attention towards that category of problem. I first traveled in Africa between university and grad school, and have maintained an interest in Africa from a scientific perspective for a number of years. I've just come back to Atlanta from a Fulbright fellowship in 2 institutions in West Africa. I was at the International Institute for Water and Environmental Engineering in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, for about 5.5 months. And then at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi, Ghana, for the remaining time. In each case, I was focusing on the project that I have been developing an interest in for some time, and that has to do with household scale biogas units. And the work, it really is about focusing on both disposal of waste, generation of energy from that waste, and there's an additional side product, which is very nutrient-rich organic fertilizer that should be able to be used in agriculture. Focusing on household scale in the African context in particular, because large-scale projects require a lot of capital. So I've been thinking both about the nature of the biochemistry and microbiology that occurs inside these anaerobic digesters, where they convert waste organic matter, household waste, into methane, biogas that can be used for cooking, but also what it would take to make these units, this kind of process, more popular at a household scale and urban kind of environment. So in addition to working with basic scientists and engineers, I've also been working with people who are interested in designing, engineering, designing, and building small scale biogas units that can be built using local resources in West Africa. And ultimately also with some small businesses and business incubators who would help kind of develop and propagate this technology. Among other things, with support of HBCU Green Fund, we were able to construct a couple of sort of model test units in Senegal, and previously done some work in Ghana, to get a sense of how they interact with the consumer, to sort of right size both the feedstock, the input waste products, and how much gas is possible to get out. Because what we'd like to be able to do is replace fossil fuels, which obviously contribute to climate change, avoid unsanitary disposal of organic waste, which pollute the environment, and at the same time reduce costs and transportation. So part of my focus on household scale units has to do with trying to reduce the requirement for transportation of waste over large areas, which is something that's quite common here in the West, but is more problematic and cost ineffective where infrastructural circumstances are less. So apart from the sort of basic science, the engineering, ultimately we'd also like to think about how one approaches communities and makes this kind of technology attractive to people. But most importantly, one can always import ideas and technology into a place, but unless people locally are interested, engaged, know how to build and maintain the energy around developing these technologies, they will not take hold. So again, I've been working also with small business incubators and small businesses that are about this similar kind of activity. And I'm trying to continue that kind of action and activity as I've returned to the United States and to Atlanta. It's a technology that's very prominent in Asia, in China and India. They have millions and millions of digesters, small scale digesters, but that technology has not yet taken hold in a large scale in Africa. So by interacting with people in the local environments, trying to get a sense of both what the needs are, what the resources are that are available. And part of my interest in Africa stemmed from an opportunity that I had to travel in West Africa between college and graduate school. That's in part what turned me towards wanting to do scientific research. And I really want to promote and encourage young people, especially young African Americans and diasporans and in HBCUs, to engage in exchange programs, to be able to see the world, not just Europe or the Caribbean, but also Africa, because I think it can be a life-changing experience for so many young people. We've taken a group of students to South Africa on a nanotechnology project about 10 years ago. And then there is a group called the HBCU Africa Education Coalition that has a very ambitious program to bring 100,000 diasporans and Africans to promote that kind of exchange in some kind of academic program over the next 5 years. So I'm hoping that HBCU Green Fund can help us sort of promote that, want to be kind of in the forefront of STEM focus in that context. And this forum, I think, is a great opportunity to talk about what's going on in local communities and to develop those collaborations and interactions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. And now we will shift to Dr. Histroically from Howard University. You're on mute.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. Although I'm not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination, I come from Howard University, which is located in the nation's capital. Howard University is a university that has approximately 110 different nationalities represented on campus. So we are one of the most, among the maybe 5 most diverse campuses in the United States. Howard University has several programs, particularly during the spring break, that are, of course, very strongly related to the conservation of nature with ecology. And they take place usually in Haiti, in Ghana, and in South Africa. The program in Haiti started right after the earthquake of 2010 in Haiti. And that program has continued to live through the students of Howard University. My area is languages. I am a professor of German and French. And as such, my role, if you will, is to highlight the role of languages in saving our planet. It is extremely important that our students communicate when they work with other groups, with other nationalities, that they communicate with them in order to make progress. Okay? I think that if we operate only in one language group, we will have only the mindset of that language group. If we communicate in various languages, we will have input from those different cultures and from the mindset that comes with those different cultures. So when the earthquake, for example, occurred in Haiti in 2010, our role in my department of world languages was to train students who spoke Creole so that they could interpret from Haitian Creole into English and vice versa in order to help rebuild Haiti. Yeah? The knowledge of languages is very important, but so is also the history behind those languages, and also the history behind the different ecological movements. For example, in some of my classes, my students will learn about the ecological movement in Germany, which started with Prince Pückler-Muskau. However, Prince Pückler-Muskau was influenced very strongly by Mahbuba, who was a young woman from then Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia, who gave him many advice on how to tend for plants and how to preserve nature. And in fact, all this preservation of nature in Germany, and Germany is well known for that, has its roots, in fact, in Ethiopia, in an Ethiopian woman. So all these historical facts have to be shared with the students, so that the students understand that preserving nature, preserving the ecology for humankind, for the future of mankind, has its roots in various cultures, in various languages as well. We work sometimes with the Humboldt Institute, and Humboldt is Alexander von Humboldt was an ecologist, scientist from Germany. So we are, in fact, a very small world, and the more we collaborate, the better. The better it is for humanity, the better it is for nature, as far as nature conservancy is concerned. Quite often, since we are in the nation's capital, quite often we are called upon by some of the embassies to work on some projects. So thus, for example, some of our students participated in a conference that had to do with the Embassy of Ivory Coast and UDC, as well as other universities, and their role for some of them was to interpret the conversation from French into English and English into French. These were students of our simultaneous interpretation class, but we also have students who participated at another level, at the ecological level. So very often we participate in, even though we are in the humanities, we do participate in those conferences and in these endeavors simply because of the language component, which is extremely important. So we are ready to collaborate with the HBCU Green Fund. And I really look forward to collaborating with other universities and throughout Africa with different programs. As you know, for example, recently there have been, for example, questions of reparations on the part of Germany to Namibia, for example. We had a small part in that also, which will be way too long to discuss in this particular segment. But what part of these reparations have to do touch on the preservation of nature, the preservation of the environment. So I will stop my remarks here and I will leave the floor to the next presenter.
Thank you so much. And with that, we are going to turn to Dr. Daryl Zizway Poe from Lincoln University. And Dr. Poe, if you would share a bit about Lincoln University, a bit about your role at Lincoln, and perhaps the connection to Africa that Lincoln might have.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity. It's really an honor for me to do anything with the HBCU Green Fund, specifically with Felicia. Anytime I get a chance, it's always been enlightening. I've had the opportunity to work somewhat, and I'll talk a little bit about myself and Lincoln in just a second. But I just want to say I had an opportunity to work with the NTA. We put on a conference not long ago in which we were able to have Lincoln University involved the first time. And for us, this was a big deal because we're a small liberal arts college. And let me just say a little something about what I do after I talk a little bit about Lincoln. Lincoln University is an interesting university. If you've ever been in the HBCU debates, the question is, which is the first HBCU? It's a lot of hype really that shouldn't be there. Because in fact, from what we know, Cheney was the first black collegiate type school. It was really a normal school, and it wasn't granting degrees. Lincoln University started off as Ashman Institute, named after Jehudi Ashman, the colonial administrator of Liberia, in honor of him, because it was started by Presbyterians who were also involved with the American Colonization Society. But in spite of itself, it gave rise to a number of very important African personalities. Besides being the first degree-granting HBCU, and later changing its name from Ashman Institute into Lincoln University after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, in honor of Abraham Lincoln. It was a school that also had the opportunity of early in the 1930s teaching courses in Negro history. The first teacher of Negro history at Lincoln University was a man who was world famous named Nnamdi Azikiwe, and he became the first president of Nigeria. But a really interesting story is after Nnamdi Azikiwe graduated from Lincoln and began teaching Negro studies, the first person to teach Negro studies at Lincoln University, he left and went to the Gold Coast colony, actually because of what he taught and the attitudes that he represented. The British Empire did not want him to come back to the Nigerian colony right away. They were worried he would shake it up a little bit too much. That didn't stop him, though, because he went to the Gold Coast colony and shook things up there and recruited somebody who at that time was going by Francis Nwia Kofi Nkrumah, later to be known as Kwame Nkrumah. And he actually convinced Kwame Nkrumah, while he was in the Gold Coast, to not go to England like many of his colleagues, but to go to the United States and try to get away from that kind of British imperial posture. And Nkrumah came, and he was the next faculty member to teach Negro studies at Lincoln University. And the two of them, Kwame Nkrumah became the first president of Ghana, first prime minister, and then a president in 1960, and then became known as BBC's African of the Millennium. So even though it's a small liberal arts school, and at the time that they went to Lincoln, it was about 1,000 students, it had a world impact. And here's another thing I should say from my colleague from Howard also. Before Nnamdi Azikiwe came to Lincoln, he was at Howard. He went to another school before Howard, came to Howard, but because of the discount course, came to Lincoln and brought some of the knowledge and fire from the firebrands of Negro studies at Howard to Lincoln University and set Lincoln on a different path. So now I'll say a little bit about myself, because I think that those two things are important, because Lincoln has a much bigger stature outside the United States, inside of Africa, than it does inside the United States. And so I am a professor of Pan-Africana Studies and History. And I know people may have heard of Pan-African studies or Africana studies. Pan-Africana studies is the kind of studies that has the whole globe as our unit of measure, but specifically the center of our focus is an Afrocentric focus on African-centered education. And what we're trying to do is not just help students develop skill set, but also help them to develop an identity that will keep them dedicated to improving the living conditions of African people in particular, but humans in general. And I think this is where we get in right now at our university. Besides being able to be connected to the NTA conference in this past year, we've also begun just recently. There was a large conversation about starting a significant solar farm on our campus. We have a lot of acres. For a small campus, we have a significant amount of acres. And I just attended a Board of Trustees meeting this past weekend in which this was discussed. And so it looks like we're going to take the plunge and do that part at least to help somewhat in reducing our footprint and helping in moderating and improving climate, the little bit we can do. And the other thing that's exciting about this is with the HBCU Green Fund, one of our Board of Trustees members, Mr. Henry Lancaster, is a significant executive member on our Board of Trustees, and he's keeping us on the right path. And so I guess I just wanted to share that. And I know I came a little late, and I promised that I was going to keep my introduction short. My research areas, just to tell you, besides Kwame and Nkrumah's contribution to Pan-Africanism. Do you hear a little strange sound in my voice? Are we okay now?
I
Okay.
think we're okay.
Okay. So besides my research in Kwame Nkrumah, which is primarily my research area, my other research area is Nile Valley civilizations, and I teach the hieroglyphs or Medu Neter, and tie that into the whole sense of identity for our students so that they have a long history of greatness and achievement, and not just the contemporary pieces. So I'll stop and into the conversation. Again, it's such an honor. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Poe. So there are so many directions. This conversation is already rich without my even asking a question. However, we are focused this week on indigenous African efforts to combat climate change. And even here in our own hemisphere, we see how Puerto Rico right now is being ravaged by an intense storm. And if you can only imagine, that happens just regularly between floods, drought, food insecurity. The list of impacts is large. So in this conversation, I think everyone has mentioned a bit about how you connect directly or indirectly. But I'm thinking, what do you think might be the power of connecting our young people with African young people, particularly when we know that 70% of the population in Africa is youthful, certainly under 35, really very much under 30. So we're a vast continent of young people, and many of whom don't have access to all of the educational opportunity that might be provided by HBCUs. But where do you think we might go? What guidance can you provide for our audience and even for HBCU Green Fund directly? And I don't see hands, so Dr. Paul, I'll start with you. I saw your hand first, and we'll go from there.
Well, one of the things, and actually Myron is the one that usually keeps me on top of this. There's a lot of creativity. I think this is what I think is the answer for the African world, but specifically on the continent. The youthfulness of it can be a boon and not just like not a bad challenge, because I think some of the problems that we see now climate wise are connected to a technology that didn't have the longevity of sight of the well-being of humans. And I think that that some of the organic challenges that we may see, if we can keep at least the training going, where our students at home, I use the term at home for Africa sometimes, forgive me, or don't. But I think if we can make sure that our youth at home have the basic training of some of the technical and technique kind of questions of sustainability and appropriate tech, I think that we may be able to begin to create a kind of technology that's friendly and what can I say? It can be absorbed by the earth instead of some of the short range technologies that have been developed in capitalist development of the recent times. This is not just, it's not really an attack right now as I speak of this on a given system, but a given perspective that has a value system of short term profit and kind of like not looking out for our generations to come. I think if we can imbue those values in our youth and our young and upcoming scientists, that we may be able to come up with the kind of creativity and technique and technology that will allow us to live longer in this environment, in the environments that we have. But I do believe that that youthfulness has a promise and not just a problem. It has some promise that we can use, especially if the HBCUs take advantage of it. Last part I'll make on this is as small a college as we are at the Lincoln University, we have a strong richness of a strong wealth of diversity of students from both the continent and the Caribbean, as well as many of the major cities in the United States. And I also want to take this chance to throw out the plug that also the first Prime Minister of Namibia, first female Prime Minister of Namibia, is also an alum from Lincoln University. So we kind of keep those connections, and that allows us to try to recruit some of those students to be involved with our projects that we have here. But really, what we're trying to do is to put the mind of our students on Africa so that they can figure out how to use their creativity to improve the situation of our people specifically at home in this area.
And Dr. Williams, I'm seeing your hand.
Okay, yeah, thank you. In terms of thinking about the potential role for HBCUs and African Americans in the context of African development, one of the things that's motivating me is the population projection. The United Nations makes population projections for North America and Europe to be about level, to remain about the same by the year 2050. The projection for Africa is the population will double between now and 2050. That's only less than 30 years away. There's clearly going to be, that's partly a consequence of having such a large young population. But what that means is the young population will increase in number. And it's really going to be vital to ensure that those young people receive an education that will help them develop the country. Most of the countries have educational systems that are based on a European model that's geared towards a different kind of economy. And I think we really need to strategize, not just among African countries, but as African peoples distributed worldwide, as to what it is that we need in the context of our educational system. And HBCUs can, I believe, help as organizations that have typically had fewer resources and produced more substantive results than other categories of institution in the United States. We had that experience of as our Clark Atlanta, one of our Clark Atlanta models go, finding a way or making one to help prevent this phenomenon from being a problem. And some of that may entail ensuring that more African students are enrolled at HBCUs, using distance education kinds of mechanisms with a focus on African students. And more importantly, not more importantly, but equally, transforming the perspective of African American students on the world to recognize that we may be a minority within the geographical bounds of the United States, but we are not the minority in the world. And to think of ourselves in that way and be really much more proactive in terms of not just reacting to what other communities do to us, but deciding what it is that we need to do for ourselves collectively as a community. I'll stop there.
Dr. Greg, I see you leaning forward.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think I have 2 points. One, I want to come back to Dr. Sefkla's introduction in her expertise in language and communication. And I'm bringing that to the fore because, you know, in environmental science, which is my area, we understand that everything is interconnected and environmental science is interdisciplinary. And one of the things that I advocate to my students is that we have two sort of our issues. We can, when we talk about governance and information, we have these issues of ignorance, mismatch, and plurality. But the solution is Dr. Sefkla, because she's talking about bringing people together to communicate with each other. And I think that's very fundamental. So when we talk about young people, I think that should be one of the principal strategies, is to get young people of African descent around the world to be communicating and talking with each other. And I think they can really take off themselves. You know, a lot of the young people are ahead of us old folks. So we really need to catch up with them. And we really need an intergenerational approach. But I think it's real important on that communication. And that's communication, period, just across all the different scales and levels. I think that is just absolutely critical. The other thing, as far as HBCU Green Fund, which is something we've talked about before, I think we ought to work collaboratively together amongst the HBCUs and the universities in Africa to put on a conference and let the youth host the conference and develop the conference. And we support them. And we, you know, mentor, guide them and everything, but, you know, start giving them these responsibilities that they're going to have to take on and really encourage them in their agency and voice of what they're capable of based on who they are, as Myron Williams said, what their history is, our history collectively, and how we understand the need for humanity to really consider and reflect on our relationship with the earth. And I think these young people, whether they're formally educated or not, what I've learned in dealing with students here in America, educated, formally, informally, young people are highly intelligent. And one of the ways they're doing that is through this technology. And I think we need to respect that as well. And we need to lean into where these young people are. And I think that's the best approach. And again, facilitate and encourage intergenerational collaboration with the goal toward elevating and promoting young people, young ideas, and that they can solve and deal with these issues that are before them.
Thank you. And Dr. Marilyn, I'm not going to try that again. So I'm just going to bring you forward because all the roads have led to language.
Languages, as I was saying, are important to not just teach and cultivate among young people, but also to use during these international conferences. Sometimes an idea that originates in Kenya has a corresponding idea, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast or in Benin, for example. And by bringing together people who are francophone from Ivory Coast, from Côte d'Ivoire, and those who are Anglophone from Kenya, for example, you get a synergy that is really unparalleled, because they go at the issue from different angles, depending on their culture, what is encouraged in their culture, what is admissible in their culture, what is highlighted and preferred in their culture. And then you see this sort of symbiosis that takes place, and this creates amazing results. To take one example, you have the distribution of medication. from using, for example, certain means of transportation. And when you combine, for example, the idea of the plane, which guzzles a lot of gas and so forth, to the idea of distributing this medication by bicycle, for example, you get those who are using more gas and who are probably having more impact on nature to really rethink their approach and to add another element, another dimension. And all of a sudden they realize, okay, why not using a bike? Why not using a bike that is all-terrain? Then they work with those who are producing local bikes, and the whole thing mushrooms into something that is completely different, that is new, that is more innovative. And then all of a sudden they add to it an app, and all of a sudden the medication is delivered through app, through a bike, and so forth. So I'm just giving this example to show how bringing youth of different cultural and linguistic backgrounds together can solve issues. We had also some similar examples coming from the Afro-descendant areas in Colombia, in the state of Choco in Colombia, where there is where the Afro-Colombian population is predominant. So when you bring them together with people from, let's say, Bahia in Brazil, and bring them also together with the African-American component and the component from Côte d'Ivoire, and you ask them to, or Senegal, and you ask them to solve issue A or issue B, you realize that the exchange of ideas across languages and across cultures is a very enriching experience. So I highly recommend that we use different languages and different cultures.
Thank you. Well, in closing, I just want to say that's a nod to the fact that, of course, we worked across 20 different countries, and there were many more languages than we ever anticipated. So in addition to English, French, Portuguese, many, many others. And we made a decision to leave some parts of our program in indigenous languages, in French, and we thought that, well, other people are always having to make the hurdle to try to translate from English. So if we were truly going to have a African and diaspora forum, that we could leave some, so we have a hip hop artist that's in Ugandan, Key whatever. We have our West Africa Day is largely in French, and we just have inserted the culture, music, languages where we could, still keeping it, it's still pretty Anglophone centric because our primary base is here. But we look to do more of this, and we really wanted to present it to our students to make the extra effort. And Dr. Marilyn, back to you.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that my previous examples focused on European languages. However, we at Howard University, we are a flagship university for African languages, and very proud of that. I'm currently myself studying Swahili, but the number of languages that we are offering 8 African languages currently. And the African languages is actually the largest component in the Department of World Languages and Cultures. We teach not only Somali, but Swahili, Amharic, Wolof, Zulu. We also teach Hausa, Yoruba. So these are the languages that we offer at Howard University. And should those languages, should you come across those 8 languages that that we are teaching at Howard University, I think that it would be really a pleasure for Howard University to participate at and to interpret or translate any material that you might want to provide. And that will further amplify the message.
Excellent. And we are going to end where we started with Dr. Greg.
I just want to come back to Dr. Poe and what Dr. Sefcola just said. He's talked about technology and how the proper or more beneficial use of technology to consider. And I'd like to put forth, if we can get these young people to start creating apps that will translate these languages so they can more easily communicate with each other and also help people to learn the languages.
Yes, there are
Felicia, you're
several,
muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Felicia.
there are several I would say initiatives underway to translate. I do believe that having a human translator, human interpreter, also increases the human contact also with the different participants, as opposed to having a machine. And the machines also have a very difficult times with the homophones. In other words, the words that sound exactly the same, but mean something completely different.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I had
So
recently,
we need different programmers for the machines.
Exactly, we need different. But for example, if I say il voulait m'épater and il voulait m'épater, it sounds exactly the same, but it means 2 things that are completely different. And so I believe in the power of human also interaction when it comes to interpretation and translation, although we can be aided also by machines.
Yes.
So with that, I am going to close this out. I'm going to thank all of you. This is a group that ought to stay bonded together. I mean, it is so rich. There's so much that each of you brings to the table. I think that as we go forward, as HBCU Green Fund and our Africa initiatives, I think each of you have so much to bring to the table. I'm excited. This is only the beginning. And I thank each and every one of you for the work that you're doing. And we're going to definitely push this out to our students to participate. They can download this for the next month. So they haven't really missed anything. Everybody can catch up, keep moving forward. So again, on behalf of the HBCU Green Fund, our board, our staff, and our tremendous volunteers, and of course, our Sustainable Africa Future Network, I thank you and appreciate your contribution.
Asante Sana.
Asante Sana. Nokabok.
Merci.
That's good.
Americano. Bye.
Dr. Marilyn has the most options.
Right.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Thanks.